welcoming back Rick now to lead a conversation on something we talked about a little bit earlier, the rise of ransomware. Many of you already know that Rick did serve as Deputy Director of the NSA before retiring from government service, and he is now consulting. But today he's joined by Kelly Bissell, by Jim Allen, who we've already met earlier today, and by Mandiant Sandra Joyce to talk about the rise of ransomware and what private companies are seeing on those front lines of this ongoing battle. And I just want to let everybody know, instead of sort of going through everybody's long, really impressive bios, all through the day today, we're going to be rotating everyone's bios up on the screen. So you'll have the time while you're listening to the conversation to see really the depth of expertise that these people are bringing to these conversations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the four of you, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Jim, Kelly, Sandra, thanks so much for joining me today. A little bit of late breaking news. You guys may know that today, CISA, the NCSC in the UK and the ACSC in Australia released a joint advisory on ransomware, and it has some interesting stuff. And I had Brad put the URL in the chat room, so you can look it up if you want. But basically, they lead with 6 key points, and I want to run those by you guys and get your reaction to it if that's okay with you. First off, they said more of the ransomware attacks involve entities that have services for hire. In other words, they'll have different people who negotiate the ransom and facilitate payment, things like that, rather than the actual operators. Second thing they said was they're seeing increased sharing of information between different criminal groups. So, for example, when was it REvil that went out of business, they shared a lot of information with other guys behind the scenes, so they didn't really lose any access to targets. The third thing was they're diversifying their extortion approaches, where you double extortion and triple extortion, where has become the norm. Fourth thing is increase in targeting cloud services and service providers. The fifth thing is an increase in attacking industrial processes and software supply chains. Again, to get different attack structures and broader attack structures. And the last thing is certainly in the US, they saw an increase in launching attacks on public holidays and weekends. So with that, over to you. And since we heard from Jim and Kelly earlier, let's start with Sandra.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. And thank you to Cipher Brief for having me. So those are great points. And I think something that might be helpful is to frame out what a ransomware event really looks like behind the scenes. And so what you have is a lot of people think that it's one bad guy, putting an implant or intruding or something like that. But in reality, it's this big business and multiple businesses and individuals that are all working towards different pieces of this. So what I mean by that is, if you're a victim of ransomware, it is very likely that there was one person or group that was selling the intrusion and the access first. Then there was another group that was actually doing the lateral movement, and then perhaps yet another group that was actually deploying the ransomware. And these organizations then don't even know each other personally, so they are unknown to each other. They have a control panel that they are given to them by the ransom the ransom family leadership. These affiliates work for multiple different ransomware families also. So this is a very complex and, more importantly, lucrative business model, where they are then, the ransomware families are given a cut of whatever profits come out, and that's based on a sliding scale of what was extorted. So, there's a lot more to say on that topic, but it really is such a lucrative enterprise that we can really count on it continuing, unless those who are operating out of areas of safe harbor are actually going to be dealt with directly.
Great. Kelly, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. As a matter of fact, this is one of those areas where crime does pay, at least for now. Sandra's perfectly right. And I would add one element to that list, that increasingly the bad guys are getting really smart on the industry. They understand that whole value chain of an oil and gas or a chemical company or a healthcare company. So they understand what the value is. So when they ask for a ransom, they actually ask with data, if you will. And that double or triple blind sort of approach really hurts the company even more. But I think there's a silver lining. I mean, maybe this is my hopeful side of me, is I've seen law enforcement really take action, working with foreign countries, if you will, to take down attackers. I've seen our law enforcement go after the exchanges to try to pull back cryptocurrency, payments, if you will. So I think we're maybe slowly turning the tide, but we have much, much more to do together, I think.
Yeah.
Jim?
So maybe I'm Kelly's alter ego. I don't know. I think, Sandra made a very important point, and I really like the characterization of ransomware as a business model. That's what it is. It's a business, right? And as Kelly said, crime pays. It's getting better, but it's not systematic, right? It's the consequences that are visited on these bad actors are still sporadic and occasional, and in many instances, to be honest, a little bit serendipitous, right? They are operating a business, and I think that actually is an advantage in many respects, because I'm in business. I was in government when I came to industry. The first lessons that were imparted upon me were managing costs, right? How important it is to manage costs, and I think the same is true probably for any business, right? The criticality of managing costs, and I think that the imposition of costs is not only incumbent on the government, law enforcement, whatever, right? There need to be consequences imposed, but I think costs can also be imposed by potential victims. It's important to make the bad actor go somewhere else. Don't be too cooperative. Don't make it easy for them to be successful in executing their business model against you. And if there is enough difficulty driven into the equation by enough potential victims, it's potential, or at least it's possible, that the business model can become less attractive. That doesn't obviate the need for government on a systematic basis to increase the probability of consequences to the bad actor. But the imposition of costs are within the control of potential victims to a much greater extent than they sometimes appreciate.
So don't be the slowest gazelle in the herd, is what
Right.
So Sandra, you mentioned something when you were talking about the business model, and I agree that business is the right approach to this, because they clearly it's a money-making business, and one that they increasingly treat like a business. But you mentioned something about access to these guys in certain places where there's places where you can't go get them, and one of those places tends to be Russia. And yesterday, the day before, there was the announcement of another gang was rolled up, although it was a little light on specifics, as I recall. What do you think the chances are of us getting visibility into, or people to act in that space, to take away the safe haven that these actors enjoy?
I think we need to think about whether or not Putin has any reason whatsoever to stop any of the ransomware activity that is going on. There is his tacit consent, whether he directs or doesn't direct, his tacit consent of these activities really puts him in a strong place, in that, having that zero-sum game mindset, what's bad for America is good for Russia, then there really is no real incentive. And When we say things like, our evil has been taken down or dark side has been dissolved and all of these, scary names of ransomware families, and we take a moment of comfort in them, but the reality is that these affiliates are not just tied to one ransomware family. So they will simply stop what they're doing, go to another, maybe they belong to 6 or 7. Even if you get the leaders, let's say, there are plenty to take their place. So it is right and good that we should make every effort and every diplomatic effort to stop these ransomware games. But this is a long-term issue, right? This isn't going to stop. And the calculus of whether or not Russia is going to impose costs really has to do with they will need to be in a position where they cannot afford not to. And right now, they can afford not to. There's not a lot of consequences for them at this time for not stopping.
Yeah, in fact, just to add, I thought it was interesting when the Russians, a couple of weeks ago, I've lost track, when they took into custody a couple of the leaders of our evil. It was almost time coincident with the statement from Putin, as I mentioned earlier, that, hey, you hurt us, we'll hurt you. It's like, I can be a good guy, or I can be a bad guy, right? You choose, right? So I think Sandra's exactly right. The motivation is not it's not there for the most part, and we would have to make some trades we might not want to make in order to provide that motivation.
Kelly?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, I think that we all play in this space and do our best to keep this country safe and even beyond this country. And we had a lot of work to do. I think that it's the first time I've seen the tide start to swing a little bit in balance, but we're still way out of balance, as Jim and Sandra know, and you, Rick. I'm curious, I mean, of what this panel thinks, because I know we're in a pandemic when it comes to ransomware. The question is, how do we get out of it? That's the question. And I do believe that if we can move together better, I mean, Sandra's company and my company work together on a lot of issues, if you will, and so does Jim's company and my company. So, but I think we got to get tighter together. We've got to get really close with, I would call them MAGs, so Microsoft, Amazon, Google. We've got to get much closer with key vendors who use, SBOMs. We got to get fluid with CISA and law enforcement. We're not quite fluid yet, but we got to get very fluid there so that we're operating at real time, just like the bad guys are operating real time in this ecosystem that they live in. So I think that we have a long way to go, but I see us forming together a little bit, and we just have to go there faster, I think.
Okay. One thing that I wanted to talk about was Ukraine. I'd like your views on what you think the future of the ransomware looks like in Ukraine. In other words, if Putin is, as Sandra said, tacitly allowing ransomware actors to do their thing, what if it's more than that? What if he's actually encouraging or directing or that sort of thing? And what do we think that looks like in Ukraine, or more importantly to this conversation, to companies that do business in Ukraine or with other companies that do business in Ukraine? Jim, do you want to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I'll start. And let me just very briefly say, I think one of the other challenges that I think is implicit, Rick, in the scenario that you described is ransomware that's not just ransomware, right? We know NotPetya is a great example, right? Look like ransomware, acted like ransomware. It was more than ransomware, right? It was basically masquerade, and it did more, and its purposes I are not entirely clear to me, but it is clear that it wasn't just ransomware. And I think that part of the challenge in this scenario is both I think the intensification, more activity, more sophisticated activity, and activity that goes beyond the business model that Sandra described so well. I think the ransomware problem, in and of itself, I don't want to say that it's solved. Far from it, for all kinds of reasons. But as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot that potential victims can do to prepare that would minimize the impact of ransomware if it finds its way into their infrastructure. Right? It's not a panacea, not possible to prepare to perfection, but there's a lot that can be done to mitigate the major impact of ransomware, if that's what it is, right? So the imperative of preparation, we continue to beat that drum. The time to deal with ransomware is not when it happens, right? The time to deal with ransomware is before it happens, so that when it happens, you can manage your way through the consequences. I think it's different if we start to look at ransomware as an instrument of national power. We see it, with the North Koreans, just as an example, right? And a different motivation in their case, because it's primarily a means of illicit funding. But in the case of what the Russians may intend in this great conflict, I think we need to view it both as being prepared for the sort of the ransomware side of the equation, but also recognize that there's very likely another game that's afoot.
Yeah, Sandra.
I agree with Jim in that there's another game afoot. And, if we look at NotPetya, that's a really good example of something that shows a bit of the recklessness that Russian threat actors have in this regard. So that was exploiting the ME-DOC tax preparation software in Ukraine, where that perhaps was the intended target, but then was released and wreaked havoc on the world, right? So these wormable exploits, these global deployments of, maybe intentional, maybe not. A lot of that, I think, goes to that other game that Jim is referencing. And what that other game is that, sure, we need to prepare, but not panic. A lot of this is about Russia trying to create that illusion of parity, that they are on the global stage as a major superpower, when they're in fact not. But cyber, creates the ability for Russia to really have effects, or this asymmetric capability that will, perpetuate an illusion of parity and will, cause that fear, that confusion, and it really gives them the upper hand. And the media is often really challenged by this, because they will pick up stories and perpetuate a lot of the fear and confusion that Russia is trying to put out in the world, which elevates them and gives them tools to then carry out their agenda. So, while ransomware will certainly be a something, if you are in Ukraine, that I think that will be, a la NotPetya, is certainly something that they will be defending against. The rest of us need to think about how we are not going to be tools for that increased fear, because it is an illusion of parity, and it's an illusion that simply, as we perpetuate it, we give them more power.
Okay, thanks. Kelly?
Yeah, look, I think when it comes to these geopolitical issues that are happening, so we can use, the Russia, Ukraine, US thing as an example. I think there's two things that happen. One is there's a weapon that they can deploy with very little consequence, ransomware, if you will. But there's also drafting that's happening, meaning cyber gangs that are not maybe directed by a nation state may take advantage of the situation. No matter if it's the nation state or drafting, if you will, the problem is this, that we can swing really problems in the world and actually deflect who's actually causing it, and by the geopolitics that are going on. I mean, right now we've got an oil company that's hit with ransomware in Germany, and the problem is that's sort of a pawn in this whole geopolitical game. And it's easy to sort of to shift blame away from, oh, it's not me, it's not you, you know, that sort of thing. But no matter how it happens, that company is still a victim. And we do need to Jim's point, we do need to be able to prepare for these things as the next geopolitical crisis comes out. Just like COVID, pharmaceutical companies were attacked and healthcare companies and so forth. We got to really understand the bigger picture and how to move the market and prepare the companies to be safe through this crisis. That's what we need to do.
So Kelly, how
And
would you
Rick,
do
if
that?
I can jump in really quick on that point, you know, another thing we need to do is also, you know, I remember after 9/11, if there was a car that backfired, everybody thought it was Al Qaeda in their neighborhood, right? And we will be tempted as things heat up and tanks start rolling, perhaps, hopefully not, but that every ransomware incident is, you know, is Russia trying to wreak havoc when it still could be simply cyber criminals who are doing what they do best and do all the time, every single day, that, you know, that our companies respond to, right? So I just want to make sure that we don't conflate or you know, for example, some of the ransomware that's occurring, we haven't linked that to a nation state. We've seen it as simply cybercrime. So I just wanted to put that, you know, make a note of that as well.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, to your earlier point about preparing companies, if you're advising a company, what do you tell them to do?
Oh, I think it's really simple. And these are practical things. Look, validate your backups. Just make sure you have backups and most don't. That's the problem. And so we got to get back to the basics. So that's one. The second thing is test your plans. The problem is we've got a lot of companies have a playbook, but they've never exercised it on the field. And so test the plans with good experts that could be a good sparring partner, if you will. That's the second thing. The third thing, I think you have to move the mentality of the IT organization from patch if you can to you better patch now. I mean, I really believe we have to make that mind shift, even at the risk of breaking an application. So and there are others, but those, if you take those three basics, if you will, I think that companies can be in a good position.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, I think that's right. I completely agree. There is a playbook, you know, for ransomware. You know, no, Kelly's converting me to be more of an optimist. You know, one thing that gives me optimism is the increasing prominence of zero trust architecture, zero trust networks. It's like, do that, right? And you don't have to do it all at once, but do that, and you're going to be in a better place. I mean, there's fundamental things, you know, that can be done, that need to be done, that will make a difference. The other thing is the criticality of having a plan and exercising it. You know, that's very important, right? Because if it happens, you know, the time to figure out, you know, how you're going to respond, that needs to kind of go the way that you've prepared for as well, right? That and even, you know, questions about are you going to pay the ransom? How are you going to pay the ransom? You know, are you going to negotiate? Who's going to do the negotiation? Right, all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, the ransomware is awful, and you know, it would be, you know, very inappropriate to, you know, to blame the victim, right? They are victims, but the preparation that's possible. These are known things, and I'm still surprised by how many entities just haven't done the basic things that they can do cost effectively to, you know, to help themselves.
Sandra, do you have thoughts on how entities should prepare?
Yeah, everything that, all the best practices we're talking about, important network segmentation, making sure your backups are not within the same network that is going to get locked up. We've seen some of that. I think that there's a bit of also, when you do your tabletops and you are preparing, make sure that there might be a cast of characters that you need at the table that you're not used to seeing there. For example, you need definitely your general counsel, but also your PR firm or your communications director or CMO. And the reason I say that is that what we're seeing is a lot of these ransomware attacks have actually morphed into more like multifaceted extortion. And that entails things like, going to the press and saying that they have access to this company, going to competitors. What is your chief success, customer success officer going to do when the threat actor literally has sent a message to your customers saying we've locked up this company, which is happening right now. So there are a lot of different people that need to be at the table to manage that external story as well as the internal remediation. And we even find that many of the clients that we work with end up having to testify in front of Congress, depending on the nature of their business and how critical it is to national security or critical infrastructure. So as you prepare, if you find yourself in that category of companies that are a move the needle when the news comes out that they have been breached, then you need to prepare for an entire public experience. A lot of CEOs are doing this their first time going, out publicly to that. The extent of that is also the worst day of their career. But that can be managed, and that can actually, in some cases, turn out very positively. Bringing awareness to the topic, creating new policy, getting Russian diplomats expelled. A myriad of wonderful things can happen because of that.
That's a really good point. There was an incident, it's a couple years ago now, with North Kedro, where they were attacked, and they did a great job of handling that, and presented it very well. And in fact, they sent their general counsel around on a briefing tour to other companies and entities to tell them about their experience. So that's
the good thing is we've got case studies for what exactly not to do. And we have case studies for how to do it well. And I hope that not just the security teams, but I hope the general counsel, the communications director, the CEO, the CFO, they need to study those playbooks of what works and what doesn't work, and then how to create one themselves. Because when you're in the fire, chaos ensues. Yeah. And the general counsel wants it to go away, and so does the communications director. But there actually is a bigger play that you have to think through, especially with the customers, if you will. And so internal friction happens during a ransomware. And I think it's important to learn it, create the playbook, test it like crazy in a simulated environment, so that when, God forbid, it does occur, you have muscle memory built in.
Yep.
And partners. Yep. I mean, I think partners are critical because you can't go into it alone.
Rick, that's really important. I mean, I think, having reaching out to the FBI or reaching out to law enforcement, to CISA, depending on if you're, critical infrastructure, I think that's a huge part we definitely need to make note of, because they can do things and support in ways that, not many others can. And I think that's a really important step. And maybe having that pre-existing relationship so that when you need them, you already know each other.
Yeah, your first conversation shouldn't be, I've got bad news for you. Yeah.
Well, and I would even say that Mandiant did a really good job of shifting the market from, it used to be that if you were breached, if a company was breached, they closed in and basically didn't share anything with anybody out of fear of legal risk, I think.
Yeah.
But when Mandiant had their little issue, what they did is said, wait, we got to share everything we know so that everyone could be safer. That's the collective safetyness, if you will. And when we at Accenture had our own little issue, we did the same, because I think that's the way to be to actually make the world safer.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep. So you guys, I keep a list of 5 things I recommend people do when to make their networks safer from ransomware. And you guys checked off 4 of them. The only one that you didn't talk, and I think this probably because it was so basic, is multi-factor authentication. But yeah, certainly network segmentation, patching, backups, and a plan and exercise the plan are all critical parts, and they ought to be done anyway, because what I've found in my experience, and I welcome your views here, is that if I find a company that's got a good cyber program, it tends to be an analog for a well-run company.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Yep, I agree. And I think a couple of things. It's also governance matters inside the company, because at least, I mean, I don't know what the percentage is because I haven't done the math, but a very high percentage of the breaches that I've seen in the last several years are a lack of MFA. So they had standards on MFA and encryption, but some local admin decided it was too cumbersome, so they turned it off, and this is indicative of a broader problem, if you will. And that's what we have to get around. And so what is the governance of security and risk inside the company? Where does it sit even, I think? I mean, most of the big banks have moved away from IT and moved to the chief risk officer. And I think that's a lesson learned that companies need to think about.
I think that's right, and I think mentioned zero trust architectures, zero trust networks a few minutes ago. The financial services industry, effectively, they've had that for 15 years, and so the difference, I think, and I haven't seen the joint directive, Rick, that you mentioned as we began this portion of the event. But one of the things that got my attention was the emphasis on OT, right? That OT is an increasing target. What I see that remains probably more a problem than not is it's the OT operators, because the consequences of introducing perturbations into the production process are massive, right? It's not a trivial thing for them sometimes to do, like basic blocking and tackling, sorts of things. So I would agree that when we look at, the kinds of practices we've been discussing as a proxy sort of for, well-run companies do those things, right? And again, I would hold up the financial services industry, especially the bigger banks, as good examples of that. I think it's a little different in not making excuses, but I think the degree of difficulty and the challenges, I think that in the manufacturing world, for example, or we've mentioned the petrochemical industry a couple times, or the energy sector. We need to do more. They're catching up. I think they've felt they've had some insulation that I think in the main has been a kind of more of a hope than a reality. But I think that's part of the challenge is and it changed now. I mean, even if we look at, say, Colonial Pipeline, for example, it really was not so much the OT, right? It was, thank God, right? That was bad enough as it was. But I think that that and software supply chain are 2 things that are very concerning, not just for ransomware, but in general. I think those are 2 areas that lag a little bit for understandable reasons, but those are hard problems. Those are problems that I would say that, hey, we kind of have the playbook, we know what we should do, but applying those in those environments it's different enough that it's that it's almost a little bit of a different problem.
Yep. All right, so we got like a minute left. chance for final thoughts on ransomware. Sandra?
Well, I think that, if I can set the stage, from January 2019 to July 2021, we saw 38 different vulnerabilities used in the attack chain of ransomware. We're seeing 0 days being deployed. Cyber criminals are becoming very sophisticated in ransomware. We've seen them switch away from many other different forms of criminality to this. So it is the go-to, cybercrime area for now and for years to come. And I think that the preparedness is going to be important. The training of personnel, the exercises, all of that is incredibly important. But until we get to the root of the problem, which is that these individuals are operating freely in places where we don't have jurisdiction, until we have tackled that issue head on and completely, we're going to see this problem continue. And I can tell you from Mandiant's perspective and our incident response, we have most of the work that we're doing now is related to ransomware incidents, and it has not slowed. Now it hasn't gotten worse, but it's certainly not slowed. And we are constantly having to turn away people and companies because we are tapped out on what we can respond to at this point. So it is going to continue to be an issue, I think, until we've gone to that root of the problem. And those operators that are, working out of safe harbors.
Okay, Jim, 30 seconds.
I won't take the time.
Okay, Kelly?
All right, I love the law enforcement side. I think that's great. I also think that we got to hold business accountable, and not just the security team. That's not the problem. We want to do the right thing. It's not even the IT team. It's actually management of those business units. If we hold their compensation to a breach or ransomware, you better bet they're going to become cyber people overnight, if you will. So I think we have to solve both problems, law enforcement and holding the business unit leads accountable.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. This was great. You guys, with no preparation from me, were fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I'd like to thank all of you as well. It's been a fantastic conversation. I think just kind of quickly summarizing, one of the things that Sandra mentioned, getting to that root of that problem, Rick, we're also going to be taking that debate up, if you will, or conversation with John Carlin this afternoon, and sort of see how the Department of Justice is seeing, and then what they're able to actually do in terms of identifying ransomware, where it's coming from, criminal gangs and nation states. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. You're masterful at this. Like, you should have been a journalist your whole career. I don't know. This NSA thing might have been a waste of your time. It was a really, really, really nice conversation. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to let everybody go raid the fridge, whatever it is you need to do, get some more caffeine, come back, because on the other side of this quick break, we're going to be led into thinking differently in our SIG innovation session by the Honorable Sue Gordon. I never, ever have a conversation with her where I don't walk away thinking about something differently. So we're really looking forward to that. We also have a poll question for you that we are going to throw up on the screen. So when you're getting your coffee or your quick little lunch from the fridge, whatever it is, answer the poll question for us too, and then we'll bring you the results and get started on the conversation you don't want to miss. So we'll be right back here with you in 5 minutes.